All right, and welcome back again to the Paisan Sports podcast presented by Elevation 5280 Sports. Dante DePlacido joined as always by Zach Deal of What's the Deal Sports. So I've got to ask, what's the deal with the Sixers? I've already done this earlier this season, but that was just like, Sixers off to a bad start. What's going on here? But legitimately now, what's the deal with the Sixers? I mean, Embiid is just I don't even know how to describe his health at this point. He is just a collapsing human being. Paul George, I mean, I was worried he would end up being Tobias Harris 2.0. He might even be worse than Tobias Harris at this rate. And, the only good thing going is Maxey. He's coming off a poor game last night. Everyone's coming off a poor game last night. They were down by almost 50. I mean, they were down by 50 at one point. I think they only lost the game by like 30, which saying only lost the game by 30 is absolutely insane. That should just tell you how bad this team is. And it wasn't even against a great team. It was against the Chicago Bulls. What's going on?
I don't even know. I'm the one thing I won't do is sit here and make any more excuses for the Sixers. So I'm done with all.
No, there's no excuses.
Like
There's no
Paul
excuses.
George is hurt, or he's at this age, or this has happened, and this is just an absolute mess. And this honestly feels like the first time in quite some time since we had like Joel Embiid actively playing on the team, even though he rarely does that nowadays. But this feels like as low of a point that the Sixers have reached since before they even drafted Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons.
Well, this is lower. This is lower because you think back to
because the expectations are so high. That's what makes it even worse. You know what I mean?
I mean,
this is actually
the year before they drafted Embiid.
Real quickly. Did you know that this is the first time they lost 8 straight games since 2016, 2017?
I believe it. I didn't even realize they've lost 8 straight. I didn't realize it was that many, but yeah, I mean, they've been a good team ever since that year you just mentioned. Because the year before they drafted Embiid, I mean, your best players were Michael Carter Williams, Thad Young, and Evan Turner. You weren't expected to be a good team in any way. And I think Evan Turner
also
traded mid-season that year.
Evan Turner just was an absolute whiff. That was just like, I mean, you had the second overall pick in the draft. I know every draft is kind of slim pickings on what you have available at your disposal, and there's certain drafts like
Boogie Cousins was there. Boogie Cousins was there. You know what I mean?
And also like during that time period, even then, like, I mean, we had Drew Holiday making all-star teams, and then we shipped him out before he even hit his prime, it felt like. And then as he got
that was what sparked the rebuild. Instead of the approach they took, instead of like trading away everything and building around one of your young players, they decided to just clean house entirely. Trading, it's funny because trading Drew Holiday, them Nerlens Noel, and a first-round pick, which they then flipped and used to take Dario Saric the next year. Dario Saric was packaged along with Robert Covington for Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler was signed and traded for Josh Richardson. Richardson. Wait, hold on. Let me keep going here. Josh Richardson was put into a trade for Seth Curry. Seth Curry was packaged along with Ben Simmons over to Brooklyn for James Harden. James Harden was traded to the Clippers for a slew of players and picks. So what's funny is like the domino effect of that trade is still in effect because those draft picks are still out there in the future. So we're still witnessing a domino effect from trading Drew Holiday, which I think is pretty funny. Yeah. But sorry, what was your comment?
No, I was just going to say Dario Saric was. I'm pretty sure Dario Saric. They drafted Elfrid Payton with like the 10th pick, and then they traded Elfrid Payton for Dario Saric with the 12th
right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
that was right. What I was just. That was the only thing I was going to add in there.
Yeah. But so that's just one extra.
You were on a roll. The thing was, so a lot of people I heard on like the radio, they were talking about just various different people, like what a lot of people are like pitching the question. There's not too many people defending the Sixers right now, but the people that are defending, like Daryl Morey, would say like, what else would you have done this offseason, and where else would you have spent that money and everything? But I mean, I personally didn't think they were going to be able to like acquire what is seen as on paper was another superstar if they weren't able to get that from a James Harden direct trade when they had James Harden on the roster. Like that's what worried me about taking on those role players with salary matches. Just I thought it would be hard for the Sixers to get like another max type player to Philadelphia without it being involved in a trade to get them there. But obviously Paul George, they ended up getting him this summer, and it's just been an absolute mess. He's been banged up the whole season after it seemed like he was healthy a little bit for the past couple years and like playing like 70 plus games and everything. There was even a time period when he was on the Clippers where he led them to an Western Conference Finals berth with Kawhi Leonard hurt in the playoffs, and he was playing his best basketball. And that's just not the advertised Paul George that they could have got. I mean, they could have waited to the trade deadline and maybe got Jimmy Butler, but I mean, you see the way Jimmy Butler, kind of runs himself out of every single town and team that he's played for. So it's only a matter of time. And bringing him back just doesn't seem like would have made the most logical sense. Last summer, there was a lot of talk about Lauri Markkanen, and then I didn't hear a single Lauri Markkanen rumor around the trade deadline at all. I didn't hear his name mentioned.
Oh yeah, I forgot. I completely
Like he
forgot
was
all
like the
about
talk
that.
of the summer. Like all the contending teams were all trying to put together these 4 first-round pick packages to go out and get him. And I didn't hear a single rumor or anything. And he's kind of like, maybe like a Kristaps Porzingis profile type player. And just with the Sixers, it's almost just time like where you have to wave the white flag and you have to start over. I mean, if you look at
Yeah,
how ridiculous the situation is in, let me read this to you real quickly. This was like from an article from the Philadelphia Inquirer that I saw repost on the NBA Legions, or actually no, it wasn't NBA Legion, it was Courtside Buzz, which is like one of the most popular like NBA content Instagram pages. And this was the report from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Joel Embiid could undergo a meniscus replacement procedure or a procedure where doctors break a bone in his hip to realign the joint and alleviate pressure. The same Sixer who had orbital bone fracture and navicle bone fracture, common phrases in Philadelphia sports lexicon, he's had 2 of each, might soon add one of these: meniscus replacement, low dose radiation therapy, or even the ominous sounding osteotomy. I guess that's what the procedure is called, in which doctors break a bone in the hip to realign the joint to alleviate pressure. One source called the procedures radical in light of the mundane injury and surgery that brought Embiid to this point. For some reason, what should have been a routine rehab and routine return to play has gone horribly wrong, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer. So,
and this is just so typical. Ever since the Embiid era, it's like you're always reading on some like improbable nonsense such as this, whether it's something regarding a Joel Embiid injury, whether it's a Sixers rookie being sidelined for a year due to a peanut allergy, whether it's another Sixers rookie forgetting how to shoot. I mean, it's just I feel like this franchise has
you
just
forgot
been
about
riddled.
thoracic outlet syndrome as well.
What was that?
That was the thoracic outlet syndrome, was the Markel Fultz like shoulder injury.
Oh, well, yeah, that's kind of what I was referencing. But yeah, I mean, it's just been like one ridiculous thing after another. I mean, thankfully, to this point, knock on wood, nothing insane has happened to our golden boy Tyrese Maxey. Knock on wood again. I think this is real.
But as much as I like Tyrese Maxey and like, there's hope for the future with having Tyrese Maxey and he's a max player, the only thing is he just can't play defense. Like I know
Yeah,
he puts the effort and he puts
he
the work
can't be
in
the
to be a good
guy.
defender, but he's just not a good defender. So it's like when like the type of players, like it's hard to even start and base a team around a center itself, especially one that's always hurt. I mean, the prototypical player that you're looking for is like the profile
A
of
two-way
Paul
wing
George,
player,
but
pretty much.
he's
You know,
35 years old and he's always hurt. But like a 25-year-old Paul George right now, I don't think I think everybody's exuberant about the situation that the Sixers are in. So, I mean, it's just, they wasted so much time with certain situations and certain contracts and trying
they
to
wasted
play
way too
things
much
out.
time with the Tobias Harris. I mean, if you could have had, if you could have allotted that max contract slot to an actual max contract player, along with Joel Embiid, along with James Harden, while Tyrese Maxey was on a rookie deal, you would have had a legit finals contending team.
And also think when Jimmy Butler went to Miami in free agency because they picked Tobias Harris. I mean, if they would have taken Jimmy Butler over Tobias Harris, not only would it have been a better short-term situation, but long-term, even though Jimmy Butler would have probably found a way out of Philadelphia and probably would have asked out or would have done something that led to his demise in Philly, that would have gave you a shorter leash on the high amount of money that you had tied up on the books on the roster. You know what I mean? So you would have
they wasted the prime years of Joel Embiid with having Tobias Harris on that team taking up a max contract slot. I mean, they truly wasted those years. This franchise, ever since Sam Hinkie left, this franchise it's just been one wrong move after another, whether that wrong move was made by Colangelo, whether it was made by Elton Brown, whether it was made by Brett Brown. Did I say Elton Brown? Elton Brand, Brett Brown, or even Daryl Morey. I mean, just four different GMs who have just completely mismanaged this roster. And the thing I was going to say about Tyrese Maxey is Maxey is not the player you can count on to lead your team to the promised land, but he puts out enough offense to where if you build the proper pieces around him, guys who can score, who can play defense, sort of what they did, sort of what they built around Jason Tatum. You have one really good two-way player, and then a bunch of just lockdown defenders surrounding him, letting that two-way player and Tyrese Maxey put up all the scoring, then you have a legit finals team. So they can build around Maxey in that sense. But you can't. I
feel like Maxey's comparable to like a Lou Williams, but he's better than Lou Williams. But it's like Lou Williams, he's going to give you.
I would more so comp him to sort of a Dame Lillard, or to like a James Harden maybe.
I don't think he's definitely not as dynamic offensively as James Harden. Damian Lillard is a better and more efficient scorer and shooter and adds a little bit more. I feel like Lou Williams, he's better than Lou Williams, and it's not that close of a race, but what he's able to do on offense.
He's way better than Lou Williams ever was. I mean, Lou Williams was great, don't get me wrong.
I don't think he's as
close. But he's too good of a player to be compared to Lou Will.
I mean, Lou Williams, we're talking about a 3-time sixth man of the year, averaging 21.
We're talking sixth man of the year who on his best season put up 18 points per game. It's not.
Well, that's also the issue of the team. This team never is in a position where it's we have a guy even in the race for the sixth man of the year, and it's we don't ever build a roster based off of this guy can have no ego and come off the bench. It always has to be we need to have the best possible trio that we can have, and then try and build a rotation and role players around them, and it just doesn't really work out, and it's just really sad. And I feel there's been one common denominator this whole time, and it's been Joel Embiid on the roster. I mean, the guy's so talented; it's so hard to give up on Joel Embiid, especially with he was averaging 36 points a game, 12 rebounds, and 5 assists a couple years ago, winning MVP. And they had the Boston Celtics on the ropes the first year that we were doing the podcast, and they just could not come through. And it's just at this point with Joel, this kind of seems like it was the last straw. Is it time to actually look into trading Joel Embiid? Do you think it actually has reached that point yet, or do you think?
I think it's reached the point where it's a legit. I think it's reached the point where it's a legit conversation now. Before it was kind of just a certain portion of the fan base who was just fed up. It was trade him, but it was never a realistic possibility. It was never something the front office would actually consider. But at this point, it's now a realistic possibility. It's a real conversation to be made. I think it all depends on how things play out with this surgery they're talking about and his rehab from the injury. I think you evaluate his progress in the offseason and make a decision based off that. I think you definitely have to get rid of Paul George. I mean, you gotta move that contract as quickly as you can. soon as the offseason
Sadly
starts.
enough, I don't know about Joel. I don't know if it would take this for Joel because the talent is just so overwhelming. But I mean, the concerns are there. Like, I mean, you might be looking at like definitely it's in consideration for Paul George. You might be looking at a situation where you have to trade first round draft picks attached to one of those contracts just to get him off the books or the roster.
I don't know if you'll need to attach a first round pick, but
I mean,
you
for
gotta
Paul
do
George,
something.
it's definitely a consideration. For Joel, that's kind of seems like a stretch, but it really, I don't know how big of a stretch that actually is.
Yeah, no,
And I mean,
you
the
wouldn't
Sixers
need to
right
attach
now
a first round pick.
losing their eighth straight game are sitting with the sixth best odds to get the number one overall pick. So
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
that's actually something I did want to talk about because I mean, earlier this year, I don't know if I ever said anything about it on the podcast, but I was joking around, like talking about like, oh, the Sixers, they're gonna tank and get Cooper Flag and bring another white boy named Cooper to the city, but it's becoming a realistic possibility now. They currently have the sixth best odds. They have a 9% chance at the number one pick. That's the way things currently are. And they're starting to, I mean, they've gotten worse as a team. They're right behind Toronto in terms of losses. I think they definitely, the way this is playing out, I think they definitely leapfrog Toronto, move up to fifth best odds, 10.5% chance. There's a possibility they leapfrog even higher. I mean, listen, the tank for Cooper Flag is it's honestly realistic at this point.
yeah, I'm trying to think back which draft it was. I don't was it the Pelicans with Zion? Do you remember when the like I think it might have been the Pelicans with Zion? They had like the a couple weeks beforehand, they had like the fifth or sixth best odds, and they just randomly ended up with the first overall pick, like from the drawing. It might have been more recent than that.
I think so. I know that happened to the Cavs with Wiggins. Um I think it also
Well,
might have
speaking of the
also
injuries of
happened to the
Joel Embiid,
Spurs with Wemby. I don't think the Spurs had great odds to get Wemby. And they ended up winning the lot. I wonder if there's a way to look at draft lottery.
oh, it
Draft
happened last year, but it wasn't that big of a deal. But I'm pretty sure it happened for like a big time player. But last year, the Hawks had like a 3% chance, and they ended up winning the first overall pick. So, I mean, it's happened. I'm trying to find. There was one where, like it had like a clear player. I forget which one it was.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure it was the Cavs with Wiggins, the Spurs with Wemby, um, and then yeah, just recently the Hawks, right?
All right, so I'm looking at an article right now. So it had to be the Zion draft because it said the craziest NBA lottery ever ever seen, and it's an ESPN article, and it's about the Zion and the Pelicans. So they must have had like um they must have been like way out. I'm pretty sure, and they got that pick from the Lakers. So I'm pretty sure that was like the Lakers' original pick. So they
Oh
traded up.
wait, hold on. I found a website that shows you the lottery winner and their odds per year. So last year it was the Hawks. They only had a 3% chance. 2023 it was the Spurs. Okay, no, they had a 14% chance. So I'm tripping about that one. The Magic in 2022 they had 14%. Um, Pistons 14%. Uh, T Wolves 14%. Okay, so we went on a good streak. The Pelicans, when they took Zion, they had a 6% chance in 2019. So the Hawks this past year, they actually had a
Yeah,
lower
I guess it
percent
was just
chance.
because of like how Zion was seen as like generational, like compared to Zachary Ricochet. You know what I mean? So it was like the biggest deal
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
for Zion.
20 let me see, 2014 the Cavs. Yeah. So this one's even crazier. In 2014 the Cavs, they had a 1.7% chance at the number 1 pick and they got it. So that in terms of odds, that was insane. And then that was used to trade for
Kevin
K
Love.
Love, which helped bring a championship to
That's
the
got to be
city.
what that might be off the top of my head. That's got to be the only time the first overall pick got traded before ever playing. Like we saw the Luca Trey Young trade. We saw Kobe get traded before he ever played for like the Hornets with the 13th pick. But that's got to be like the first time the first overall pick got shipped out before like even like sitting down with the team at all, because that trade was like orchestrated like right away, right after like that selection and everything. A couple weeks
hold on. I just pulled up 2011, and the Clippers, they had a 2.8% chance, but that pick was traded to the Cavs when they took Kyrie.
Yeah.
What the hell did they trade to the Cavs?
Well, that was around the time period they got Blake. So didn't they like Blake? They spent like the second or like sixth overall pick on Blake. So it might have been like something they got back like in that draft, maybe.
Yeah, well, yeah, 2011. That was the year Blake got drafted, right?
Yeah, he sat out his whole. Blake Griffin was the original Ben Simmons with the Rookie of the Year. He sat out his whole rookie year and then won the Rookie of the Year in
Wait, no,
his
he was not drafted
sophomore
in
season.
2011. What was he drafted? 2010? When the fuck was Blake Griffin drafted?
He might be 09. He was 09, first overall pick in 09.
So then what was this trade then in 2011? Who could the Clippers have, who would the Cavs have given, what did the Cavs give to the Clippers to trade up and take Kyrie? 2011 Cavs Clippers trade. I am puzzled now, and then we should actually get back to our topics. But 2011, the Clippers trade the first pick in the NBA draft for Mo Williams and Jamario Moon. Are you serious? Mo Williams and Jamario Moon?
No, I saw that Jamario Moon was in the dunk contest. He was on the Raptors. Remember him? He was in the one dunk contest back in the day. That was the only thing that he did of worth in the NBA. On top of Mo Williams getting traded there, not only did they get the that draft pick that turned into the first overall pick, they got Baron Davis on top of the first round draft pick.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking. I just saw that just now. What the heck? What kind of numbers was Mo Williams putting up leading up to this?
Nah, that had to be like a salary dump or something.
He was playing 13 points per game, 29 minutes per game over in Cleveland, and then Jamario Moon and Mo Williams for the number one overall pick and Baron Davis.
Yeah, that's gotta be.
Did they not even get like another pick in return?
I don't know how people found that trade nowadays. Like that's not like a trade you hear about historically, but that's got to be one of the worst trades of all time.
Oh, okay. Okay, so the trade happened before it became the number one pick. Okay, this makes way more sense now. I'm looking at
but that doesn't,
well, yeah, you got to like top 3 protected or something. That's insane. It says the pick was projected to be the 8th. This is somebody on Reddit 4 years ago. The pick was projected to be the 8th pick with something like a 3% chance of being the number one overall pick. And my fact check says 2.8% chance. So, yeah, pretty much the same. Neil Alshley, who was the Clips GM at the time, didn't put any protections on it using the reasoning that the draft was weak. It's one of the reasons I still do not
Clippers have a couple of
as
worst
GM
trades
to
of
this
all
point.
time.
That's a bad trade, dude. That is such a bad trade.
They got a couple of the worst trades of all time on their history block. I mean, they had this Shea Gilgeous with 7 first-round picks trade for Paul George, and then they got that trade on there as well.
I mean, it definitely was a weak draft outside of Kyrie. I mean, Kemba Walker, the 9th pick to the Bobcats, but
I mean, so that ends up with the first. That's when
and
Doc's
Clay
there.
number 11 to the Warriors, but they didn't know how good they were going into that draft. But like at least make it number 1 protected. Jesus Christ.
I mean, the craziest part is like think about like that was the Lob City era. That could have been Chris Paul, Kyrie Irving, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan on one roster.
Well, you can't have either Kyrie or Chris Paul running the 2. I would think a different trade.
Well, I'm just saying, based off like if they got the first overall pick, they were picking Kyrie like that. That would be a known thing. But like they could have traded.
Yeah, I mean they would have traded for somebody in lieu of Chris Paul, but I mean they could have added another star to Kyrie Irving, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan essentially.
But
let's get back. Who knows what would have happened to to the Cavs. All right, yeah. Let's get back to the podcast. Let's get back to the.
Yeah,
Oh my God,
yeah,
we're 25
that
minutes
took a
in.
lot
Yeah,
of time out, but that was
that
very
took a
interesting.
way too much time. Okay, we have ADHD brains.
Paul George also said after the loss to the Bulls that this team like doesn't even look like they're in contention for a play-in team, and that they're not a championship level team at all. I mean, those comments kind of tell you the direction of this team, especially a guy that's getting paid that much. And like, it just seems like Paul George. I mean, he was like posting pictures with his fiance over the break, the All-Star break. And it is what it is. Like, everyone's got to live their life outside of like their profession and their job and everything. But it just seems like since he's like came here that it like he doesn't understand Philadelphia from a sports perspective. And I mean, it just seems like this just was like not a natural fit, and his type of mentality and the type of player that he is at this point in his career is just not working out. So this most likely, in my opinion, I wrote down like, in your opinion, like, how much longer does Nick Nurse actually have? Do you think he's going to end up being the scapegoat just like every other coach has been? Like, think about all the bull.
He very well could be. I mean, he hasn't really done anything differently as head coach
He was seen as the
since
coach that was
coming.
supposed to get them over the hump, and the issue was like Doc Rivers all along and Brett Brown, and not having these guys to facilitate all this talent in the right direction. And it seems like they've just gone backwards since Nick Nurse has became the coach.
Yeah, he could very well. I mean, because I mean, when you look at like even when Embiid, Paul George, and Maxey have been on the court together, they still haven't been able to win games. I mean, you can very well um, po- point the finger over at Nick Nurse. It's exhausting going through coach after coach trying to find the right one, and we can't find the right coach for this team. But yeah, I mean, I would not be surprised at all if Nick Nurse is gone after this season.
Do you think he deserves to be gone, or do you like?
I don't know if he deserve. I don't know. It's just there's just so many issues all in
I feel
all.
like basketball also has the shortest leash on coaches of any other sport as well, too.
Yeah, I think so because like with basketball, it's like the coach isn't the same thing as for like football or baseball. It's kind of like a whole different situation where it's just like you're just throwing guy out there to run the X's and O's, um, and not necessarily like build a culture as much.
Did you
So I
hear
think
about
that's
Draymond's comments about like someone he was talking to somebody around the All-Star break, and they brought up something about coaching, and someone said like, "Oh, like Draymond would never be a coach or anything," and he's like, "I've already been offered the Warriors head coaching job after I retire."
I didn't hear about that. No, that's interesting.
Yeah, that was something, but like perfect example of like a short leash on a coach. Like what? Um, why am I drawing a blank on his name? Oh, I don't want to look it up either. I need to know it. Um, Frank Vogel, Lakers coach, he was like canned what, a year after they won a championship with Anthony Davis and LeBron. Adrian Griffin,
I didn't even realize Frank Vogel was the coach of the Lakers at one point.
he was the coach that won them the championship, but Adrian Griffin with the Bucks was fired after they started what, 32-13, and the
That was
job
the dumbest. That's. I mean, I remember us reacting to that on the podcast. That is still mind boggling to this
I mean,
day.
I feel like we like, to be fair, we do have bias towards Doc Rivers getting a job, but like that doesn't cover up like firing any
Well, no,
coach.
I mean, in terms of mind boggling, I mean firing the head coach at the time. That made no sense.
Apparently, he
But
was doing like
it was
weird
more
stuff in the
mind
locker
boggling.
room. Like he was like real. I think he was like overly religious or something like that in the locker room. The players weren't with the vibes, but like
Who gives a
the
shit? They
vibes
were
must have
winning
been good
games.
when you're winning 32 out of 45 games. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
like who
something has to be going
cares?
right.
I mean,
But yeah, I
and
mean,
that's the
I feel
thing
like
with that's a problem too with the NBA is like if there's a head coach that like the players like are like iffy about, it's like all right, like I feel like the players in the NBA have way more say and control over everything than
well, it's just a
in other
numbers game at the end of
sports.
the day. It's just like there's like it's the least amount of players on like any team sport that American wise. You know what I mean? So it's just like
Yeah. Speaking of players becoming quicker,
To your Draymond thing, I'm still shocked that Deshaun Jackson and LaShawn McCoy both found head coaching jobs in college. I'm sorry, I love both of those guys. They do not seem like head coach.
You
They
mean
do
Michael
not
Vick?
seem like head coaches to me. What's that?
You said
Oh
LaShawn
yeah,
McCoy.
Michael Vick. Okay, I can see it more with Michael Vick. Djax though, I can't see him as I cannot picture him as a head coach. I can picture Vick, not Djax.
They're playing each other this season too.
Yeah,
North
I
State
did
and
see
Delaware
that.
State. It's kind of a
Yeah.
trend that's going on nowadays. I mean, even like other coaches, Marshall Falk was just brought to Colorado to be their running backs coach. So I think I told you on the podcast, Marshall Falk, that before the Rams playoff game, Saquon reached out to Marshall Falk about teams like trying to stop somebody when like they're the focal point of someone's game plan. So that was somebody that
Yeah, I think it does sound familiar. But yeah, what was the next thing you wanted to talk about?
I think we transitioned to a little bit of Phillies talk right now. So I mean, it was really repetitive. I felt good about that Sixers talk that we just had, though, is because it seems like every time we try and talk about the Sixers, like there wasn't too much to talk about. It's the same overlying issue. You know what I mean? Now we have a little bit more information, and like the Eagles aren't in season, so we actually have time to like break it down. But like it seemed like it was
Yeah,
getting
and not
really
only
repetitive, like
that, like when
how
we
some of the
were
Phillies
talking,
talk like last summer was like real repetitive of like the same topics over and over. It seemed like that with the Sixers, but it felt like we kind of broke through a little bit because it seems like the floodgates are now actually opening, and it's like people are like, like what is actually
because before earlier in the season, like I mentioned at the start of today's podcast, before earlier in the season, it was like the Sixers are off to a horrible start. Things aren't looking well. But now it's to the point where it's like, oh, this is actually a total shit show. This is actually a team that, like before we were talking about, oh, can they still get on a win streak at some point and make the play in? But now it's at the point where it's like, no, this is a bad team. They're going to finish with a bad record.
Well, the Eagles covered for them for how long? You know what I mean? Everybody cared about the Eagles. The Eagles went on their long run, and that was all everybody's focus, and took all the attention away from the Sixers. And now that the the Eagles aren't in season, now that's the
Well,
scheme.
the good thing about the Eagles is and actually this is going to work as a great transition. But the good thing about the Eagles is, since they were able to win it all, they were able to play long enough to really keep us occupied until the start of baseball season, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, what was the parade 2 weeks ago, and now we already have spring training. So now it's time for the Phillies. Let's get away from the Sixers now. Let's just watch the ship go down and hope we get a strong draft pick. And let's focus on the Phillies, who my opening comments to the Phillies now are because I was getting a haircut today, and me and my barber, we always just talk sports the entire time. It's kind of like for me, it's like a precursor to the podcast on a day where I'm doing the podcast. Some topics fresh in my mind. But, what I was saying to him is the way I feel about the Philly season is I don't have high expectations for them. I think they get into the postseason as a wild card team. I don't think they go far. But I'm excited for baseball season just because I'm excited to start watching some baseball again. So, I mean, as long as they're, good enough where they're winning games and I'm enjoying watching baseball, that's all I can hope for at this point, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I have a newfound appreciation for baseball over like the past 5 years, I would say, especially when they added things to the game. I'm not a big fan of like change in any sport, but like when it actually progresses the sport forward, like the pitch clock and stuff like that, then I'm actually a big fan of it. And I think that made it easier. I found myself watching like all games from around the league. And like 5 years ago, I was like strictly watching Phillies baseball and not as often as I do now. So I am happy for baseball season to roll back around. I'm a little upset the way that the tone is set for the locker room with the Phillies this year and how everybody's kind of down and not really expecting too much. Nick Castellanos kind of poured water all over the fire about like the championship expectations. You got to think
I have such a different take on those comments. I think
last spring training, all they talked about last spring training is like get me the effing trophy back. You know what I mean? This,
yeah,
that,
and they came
I
up
felt like they
short.
put too much pressure on themselves, but I feel like now they're kind of retracting all that. It just seems like they're real
But baseball, but here's the thing.
Beta and not alpha.
Here's the thing, though. here's the thing though. Baseball is the kind of sport where that works. Like in football, you want to be fired up, determined, refusing to lose. I mean, that's how the Eagles kicked the shit out of the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Baseball is so different because it's like baseball like either requires focus or like a freed mind. You know what I mean? It's like, like you think about like a hitter in a slump, who's in a slump, and then if there's a hitter in a slump, their hitting coach might tell them, just stop overthinking it up there. Just go up to the plate, play loose, and hit the baseball. So I feel like baseball is the kind of sport where you can just like if you feel like you have zero pressure and you're just out there playing loose and just trying to have fun, then that's what can net the best results, in my opinion.
I feel like you do need to be even kill and nonchalant about things, and it's like an everyday grind. So like that's where I feel like you need to be locked in every single day, and you need to have focus every single day. I do get what you're saying is like you can't put too much pressure on yourselves because it's like you can't bottle it all up because there's so many moments. It's not just like one Sunday for 3 hours, you know what I mean? And you bottle it all up and then you unleash it, and then that's that, and then you move on. It's like you might play a game at 7 o'clock at night and it gets over at 10 o'clock, and then you're playing another game by you're warming up at like 11 o'clock the next morning. You know what I mean? So it is a different type of sport. It's a grind. There's so many things in the season.
It's 162 games.
I know, but it just seems like right now the leadership is kind of quiet in a way, and nobody's stepping up and saying like, oh, our championship window is still here and we still have an opportunity that we can seize, and we just need to like take it. It kind of just seems like everybody's
but that's
down.
the thing. I kind of like it if they're just gonna go through the whole season without really any pressure and just play. Because I mean, look, in 2022, like I think Nick Castellanos was kind of right. You know what I mean? Like in 2022, there wasn't really any serious pressure on them, and they made it all the way to the World Series. 2023 last year was like, bring me that effing trophy. There's a lot of pressure on them.
And 2022 was like
once they got into the dog days of the season, they shit the bed.
They broke through in 2022, and that was the first time they made the playoffs in the Bryce Harper era, and that just seemed
first
like
time they had made the playoffs since 2011.
I know, but I know, but the reason why I say the Bryce Harper era is because I was going to say is when you compare it, like a perfect example would be like the Sixers, because like the Phillies were like so irrelevant from like that stretch after like when the Ryan Howard contract was like expiring and just like horrible from that point until they got Bryce Harper. It was just an absolute mess. So like when the Sixers had like Drew Holiday was a really good player. He wasn't a great player. He was a really good player that was ascending, but never got to the top of the game, never was going to ascend to the top of the game. But he was a very solid franchise player that brought some people to the seats, but not like the most overwhelming player. The reason why you like talk about this and like it seems like I feel like they need to capitalize on this because like Bryce Harper just like isn't your average Joe. And like I'm not saying Drew Holiday is like your average Joe, but like Bryce Harper is like a generational all-time type talent player. And the same thing with Joel Embiid. So it's like when you're not winning championships, when you have such a rare talent on your roster, you feel like you're wasting time. And I feel like with the Phillies, I feel like they're wasting time. And it's just so much. I know they didn't make the playoffs for like 10 plus years, and then they go straight to the World Series. Then everyone gets hyped up. And they added a top 10 player at the time from that time period on to make the roster even better. They've had really good pitching. They've upgraded the pitching, but it just seems like they're regressing in a way, and I don't understand why people are okay with that or acceptant of that when the championship window was so high. Even until last year, it took like one loss from the Mets, like for everybody to just be down in the dumps. Like this is what the Phillies are now. You got to think about this chokehold that New York sports had on us from beating us with the Knicks in the playoff series with the Sixers, and then the Mets beating us in the playoffs. And we thought we were never going to live it down to New York sports, and that was just going to be the new trend.
You got the
and
last
then Saquon Barkley, baby. Yeah, and then Saquon Barkley shut all of that up so quickly. So I feel like people don't understand that this team as much as like I'm not as confident with them not bringing too much talent from the outside in, I wanted them to make some moves. I mean, I feel like this team's still pretty talented, and they should treat themselves that way and look themselves in the mirror and have the fire of like wanting to go far and compete in the playoffs. Because the way that they're talking right now with the dialogue, I mean, it sounds like a team that would be happy to just make the playoffs itself and just get there and be a part of the ride. So, I mean, when Trey Turner even said it himself, he didn't even watch the hitting tape from the Mets series, which is alarming. Like, that's something I'll bring it up real quickly just because it ties into each other, even though it's an Eagles topic. The Eagles had a team meeting for the parade prep to learn about, like, obviously all the stuff that was going on with the parade and everything. And then Vic Fangio forced the defense to watch the film of the Super Bowl and was criticizing them after the team meeting about the Super Bowl. After the Super
about the
Bowl,
second half of that game, yeah.
and Trey Turner doesn't even want to watch the batting tape and the hitting tape from the Mets when he struggled, the Mets series.
But that could go back to what I was saying, where it's like sometimes with hitting, you don't want to overthink things and you just want to play it was. But going back to what you were saying before, in terms of this team regressing, I mean, it's not like why are they getting worse? Well, they're aging. This is an aging team. This is a JT Realmuto who looks a little bit worse each season. This is, I mean, well, I can't really put anything on Trey Turner because he wasn't put.
Well, do you think they expected like Alec Boehm and Bryson Stott to be further along? I mean, Alec Boehm was an all-star last year.
Well, Bryson Stott did reveal that he was playing hurt all last season. Hopefully, there's a lot of truth to that, and he comes back a lot better this season because we're going to need to see a lot more out of him this year than we did last year. Last year was pretty abysmal. Boehm. He showed flashes last year of being a premier hitter leading into the All-Star break. Wasn't really the same after that.
But he's also being forced into a role that he isn't. Like, he's a good hitter, but he's not a four-hole cleanup guy. So that's why.
Well, he did do well, but he did do well in that role leading into the All-Star break. So maybe,
he drives some runs. I appreciate him driving in runs, but like we need somebody that actually has like consistent pop, like actually getting guys on base, and that's why they're looking at changing the order. And they had a game the other day, spring training game that got rained out versus the Pirates, and they were kind of easing each player into it. But this game actually featured a lot of the normal everyday starters for the Phillies because they were going up against Paul Skeens. It ended up getting rained out, but the reported lineup was Trey Turner in the 1 hole, Kyle Schwarber in the 2 hole, Bryce Harper in the 3 hole, Alec Boehm in the 4 hole, and I'm pretty sure it was Castellanos in the 5 hole, which that lineup, if I believe I got that correctly, but sometimes it kind of like triggers my brain to like feel like I'm not pronouncing it right, because if you notice the trend of that lineup, it just seems like you got a righty, 2 lefties, and then 2 more righties. Like, why would the Phillies do that and think that would be the optimal lineup?
I think at this point, I don't know. Right now, I feel like you can't worry too much about not having 2 righties in a row or 2 lefties in a row. I think right now with the lineup, it's more about getting the right guys in the right spot in the lineup and not so much about handedness. As long as you're not doing like 3 or 4 righties in a row, I wouldn't worry too much about having 2 righties and 2 lefties. That is what it is. I think right now that the main focus should be just getting the right guys in the right spot in the order so that they can, maximize their abilities.
Like the thing that I always loved about Jimmy Rollins is like him being a switch hitter at the top of the lineup. You know what I mean? So like you just have so much versatility of what you can do. And
but then also, but also with that, with that like 08 team, you had after the 2 switch hitters, Rollins and Victorino, you had Utley a lefty, you had Howard a lefty. You had Burrell, a lefty, and then you had Jason Worth finally, who was a righty. And then even who the hell was after Worth? Who would have been the 7 hole? That would have been Feliz. I can't remember if he was righty or lefty, but yeah, I mean, they rocked with 3 lefties in a row in the heart of their order, and they were able to get things done. It's really more about putting the right guys in the right spots.
I agree. Where do you think Kyle Schwarber, if he is taken out, like the last week we dropped the stat, I saw it on the MLB Network when they brought somebody on to talk about it. Since Kyle Schwarber has been a Philly, 85% of his at bats have come in the leadoff spot, and 68% of his home runs have been solo home runs. So it seems like to move Kyle Schwarber out of that spot, even with the success that they've had with him being on the Phillies, being in the leadoff spot, is for him to generate. When his power is generated to have more guys on base in those situations. So do you feel good about putting him in the 2-hole? I feel like more so I would try and get Bryce moved up to like the 2-hole. I like, in my personal opinion, I would go Turner, Harper, Bohm, Schwarber, and Bohm could be interchanged with like the hot streak of how Nick Castellanos and him are doing between each other.
Yeah, I mean,
that's how I would conduct the lineup.
I like that lineup. I think that would be a great way to play it. There is also the thing where you want runners on base for Bryce Harper. So I mean, I don't hate Harper in the 2-hole, but I think the 3-hole
But
is
that's
where
also
Harper
clogs things up. That clogs things up for Kyle. If Kyle Schwarber's in the 2-hole, that kind of clogs things up on the base pass, like for the rest of the team. And that was another question that I had on my topic list today. It was like, to the Phillies, like it hasn't really caught up with them. And I mean, they had Trey Turner, arguably the fastest player in the entire sport, even though his steal numbers are down. He also had to deal with Kyle Schwarber being on base in front of him, so there's nowhere for him to really go in those situations. But we know how fast he is. And Bryson Stott, I think, stole like just under 25 bases last year. Johan Rojas, who's a rotational player at this point, he was playing like every day center field for a little bit of time. But outside of those three guys, they don't really have any base runners. Like nobody that really generates any speed.
Well, yeah, that's been a problem with this team. The one thing I did want to continue to say though is I don't hate Schwarber in the 2-hole because I mean your 2-hole guy, you want it to be somebody who gets on base. Just looking at numbers right here, Kyle Schwarber, his on base percentage last year was 366. I mean, that's great. I like that in the 2-hole. You're getting him out of the leadoff spot, so maybe more of those solo home runs become 2-run homers with Turner on base. Maybe Turner leads off with a single and then Schwarber hits a double into the gap and that easily scores Turner. So I mean, I think Schwarber. I think swapping Schwarber and Turner is still an improvement. Even more ideal to put Schwarber in the cleanup spot. Maybe you put Bohm in the 2-hole. Because I just like Harper in the 3-hole, but I still think it's an improvement of the lineup, and I think it will more so maximize things. Also, while I'm looking at the numbers for Kyle Schwarber, this man deserves more credit. I mean, you're looking at a 3-year stretch with 46 home runs, 47 home runs, 38 home runs,
I was actually kind of shocked.
104 ribbies, 104 ribbies. On base percentage, 323 is first season, not great, but then 343, 366. I mean, he's put up some terrific numbers his first 3 years.
I was shocked that I saw like a milestone post about players that could reach different milestones in the MLB coming up this season. I think Bryce is like 40 or 50 RBIs away from 1,000 RBIs in his career, and Kyle Schwarber's like 16 home runs away from 300. I would have thought the pace that he's been on like recently that Kyle Schwarber would have a lot more than 284 career home runs, but he didn't really do too much.
Yeah, you would think so, but yeah, I mean, looking at his home run totals from previous, first of all, 2020, obviously not many home runs. The shortened season, he only had 11. But he did have 32 in 2021. He had 38 in 2019, 26 in 2018, 30 in 2017. He didn't play in 2016. He had 16 in 2015. Yeah, I mean, but if he was playing his whole career at the pace he's currently at, yeah, he would be much higher than almost 300.
Who do you think is a player that can kind of like step up that's kind of in the shadows right now for the Phillies? Kind of like how Ranger Suarez like was in the beginning of the season when he started off like 9-1 last year or 10-1. Do you see any player that you could bring to light that might actually be able to make a big impact for this team outside of like the core of like the guys that have, we're talking about the top of the order now, but is there somebody or maybe even a pitcher that can rise up the ranks?
No. I can't think of anyone. I don't really see anyone.
I feel like really the only person,
surprising us.
Maybe if Brandon Marsh has like a more consistent season, Kepler, you can look at
I
that.
could see maybe I could see Rojas having a breakout year where he just hits for a super high average and does a lot on the base paths, continues to play great defense. If anything, I'm going to say Johan Rojas because he did show flashes his rookie year. I think,
he
if I have to go with anyone, and I'm not saying I think Rojas will have like a huge breakout year, but if I could see it happening from anyone, I would say
we could see somebody in the bullpen too, because I feel like they didn't adequately.
Who the hell is even in our bullpen now? I mean, why do we keep getting rid of everyone? We got rid of Estevez. We got rid of Hoffman. Who the hell do we even have anymore?
They got Romano. They got Strom.
Two shit
Orion
seasons in a row, dude.
What's his name just left too? I'm pretty sure the best reliever in the entire bullpen.
What's up?
The best reliever in the entire bullpen, I'm pretty sure, left this offseason too to go like play overseas or something.
Yeah,
Junior
this
Marte.
team's a mess. I don't have many expectations for them. I'm just excited to get back to watching baseball. That's pretty much it.
Do you think, like how we talked about Nick Nurse, his job possibly being on the line? Do you think Rob Thompson's job could be on the line if they have like a third straight season of regression?
I think if they do worse than last year, then I think so. But I think, the regression has been more so on par with the age regression of the team. I don't really think it's on Topper. This team was, no matter how much talent they brought in, starting with like 2018, this team was just not winning for quite a few years. And then they bring in Topper and he brings them to a World Series. So I think Topper deserves more leeway than Nick Nurse for sure. But if this season ends up being a disaster, then maybe. But yeah, you look back at 2018 was when they brought in Harper, and that's when they started bringing in additional talent as well, like guys like Carlos Santana. I remember when they brought in Wilson Ramos at catcher, stuff like that. And
I feel like they need, who's another player that they're like missing? Like they need just like a guy that's just like solid. He's nothing crazy, but he's just
Asdrubal Cabrera. That's another guy they had brought in at one point. But sorry, what were you going to say?
I think they need another player like a Gene Segura type player who's just a solid player that you can just count on. That's always reliable. That's just, he's just an overall good baseball.
Well, that's kind of Edmundo. That's Edmundo Sosa. You just named Edmundo.
I know,
Sosa.
But I'm saying it's like a starter. Like if they had somebody that they could rely on, and like in the outfield that was like that, where they didn't have to platoon it all the time. I feel like, if Kepler can be that, that would be cool. But like, I still feel like this team's going to.
Kepler is just Whit Merrifield 2.0. That's what that is.
I feel like this team.
That's Whit Merrifield.
Even with the two that the Mets have, that Jesse Winker, like a guy like that, you know what I mean, who just drilled us in the playoffs and had like a big hit moment. Like we don't have anybody.
I would like a Jesse Winker.
Like we don't have anybody like that, and that's just like what the issue is. But last thing, Phillies wise, before we talk about some Eagles, so we got to do the meatball.
Before Eagles is my meatball of the week, but go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. We do meatball of the week and then go to the Eagles. But if you're looking at the Phillies rotation, they added Jesus Luzardo this offseason. They already had Ranger Suarez, who there was rumors about him possibly getting traded this offseason. He has a contract impending in like the next year or so. And he kind of regressed from last season, but he obviously started off really, really strong last season. Christopher Sanchez, they gave a 4-year, $22 million deal to. I think that was the numbers on the deal. So he's locked up, and somebody that emerged for them, another lefty with Ranger Suarez. And then obviously we had the two aces at the top with Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler. At full strength and full health, where do you think this Phillies rotation actually ranks amongst different rotations in the MLB? Because I feel like it ranks actually pretty high.
I'm actually going to say top 3. I think at its best, it is a damn good rotation. And I remember before the All-Star break last year, it was like everyone had a sub-3 ERA. Who was the starter that
we were using as the fifth starter last year before he got
What's
hurt,
his name?
who was meant to be a reliever, and he was just lights out.
Yeah, I forget, and he was hurt for like the entire year.
Yeah,
He was signed off a 1-year deal from like the Tigers or something, right?
Maybe. Hold on, I'm looking into this as you are. Who the hell was it?
Spencer Turnbull.
That's right. Yeah, dude, he was the lights out. That was a shame because that going into while he was healthy and the fifth guy on the rotation, that was at the time it was the best rotation in baseball. I think right now there's nobody topping the Dodgers rotation, especially with the return of Shohei to the rotation. But the Phillies are definitely up there. The problem is, having 5 great starters does not help you in the postseason at all. You need to hit, and I think Jesus Lazardo can help us win more games in the regular season, but I don't think it's going to help come playoff time. I also didn't love the move to go out and get a pitcher because of that reason, A, and B. When it's time for Andrew Painter to finally pitch in the majors, allocate those money and resources to bring in a bat that can help out, a bat better than the bat of Max Kepler.
You know what's even crazier is I forgot about that pitcher. I used to think he was so good, and then he was out of baseball last year because I think he got like a domestic dispute with his wife, and he was like 25 years old, and he would still be on the Dodgers staff if he didn't get in trouble. Julio Urias, he was like 25, and he was one of the best pitchers in the league, and then he was out of the league like last year. So imagine if he was still in their starting rotation. He was like the third runner-up, the third Cy Young runner-up in 2022. He was like just turning 26, had already like debuted at the age of 19. So I mean that could have even made the Dodgers rotation even deadlier. So
who started off as like a promising pitcher for the Phillies last year, and then it quickly spiraled out of control was Tyler Phillips. He had a good run at first, and then
yeah, I was actually about to bring him up
awful.
because he was like the reason he had those couple starts. He had the 9-inning, what was it, the 9-inning shutout that he had, and they said they weren't going to trade for a starting pitcher at the deadline because of him. And then right after the deadline, he was horrible, and they like unraveled completely. So
remember 2 years ago, the other pitcher from the Tigers, I'm blanking on his name, who threw a no-hitter and then was just god awful after that. I'm blanking on his name.
yeah, I know. It starts with an M, doesn't it? Last name starts with an M.
Maybe. I don't know.
I can find the name real quick.
Phillies 2023 no-hitter. Once I hear, Lorenzen. That's right.
Oh, yeah.
Michael Lorenzen. Yeah. But anyway, it's now time for my meatball of the week. And this week we have a big meatball, a big sloppy meatball, big sloppy, disgusting. I don't want to say sloppy, disgusting meatball, but it's a sloppy one. Steve Smith, former NFL wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers and Baltimore Ravens. Steve Smith, he's reached the headlines this week because somebody went on Twitter and exposed that Steve Smith had been sleeping with this man's wife, sharing their text between each other, which I will not get into the specifics of. But they were quite racy. They were quite raunchy. There were discussions of a certain birth control device being rearranged. It has the same name as what are those things? Bombs in the military? You know what I'm talking about? You know the device I'm talking about for women. I think it's the same name as like a field mine. So if anybody was confused on what I was talking about, there's your clue. But yeah, Yeah, Steve Smith has found himself in quite the messy situation after devolving in quite a few messy situations. Steve Smith, you're my meatball of the week. Did I say devolving? That was not the right word.
Yeah, I think you were overwhelmed.
Partaking? Partaking would have been a much better word.
I think
Devolving
you're a
makes
little
no sense.
overwhelmed reporting some of the facts of that situation, but let's get to
Yeah, I
some.
was trying to figure out the right way to say it all without getting too inappropriate on this podcast.
Let's get to some positive football talk. Well, I don't know if this
Yeah,
is
let's
the most
talk about a
positive
team
thing to
where a
start off.
different Steve Smith once played back during the Dream Team years, where I, as well as a lot of other children, probably at the time saw the news of Steve Smith going to the Eagles and thought it was that Steve Smith, but it was actually the Giants Steve Smith who ended up doing nothing on the Eagles. Let's talk about those Eagles.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't know if this is positive news to start off with, but it was revealed that Nolan Smith actually tore his triceps in the Super Bowl, which most likely happened in the first half, and then he played in the second half on pretty much one arm. And there's videos of him.
Somebody
There's videos of
showed.
him like long arm rushing a left tackle or right tackle with one arm and having success, pretty much bull rushing them backwards. But that also is a reason why a lot of people kind of were confused that Jalix Hunt played so much in the Super Bowl, and he was very effective in the game. And also, you got to think Bryce Huff was a healthy scratch, and they were already dealing with limited resources in the rotation and cycling through some guys. But yeah.
Yeah.
So, one
So
thing that I will say is a positive on the situation. One thing I will say is we just saw a guy that's 10, no, not even 10, 13 years older than Nolan Smith tear his triceps in a game in November and make it back for the Super Bowl. And it looks like Nolan Smith's going to be back for training camp time. So if Brandon Graham can come back from a torn triceps, I know every player's injury affects their body differently, and every injury is different in itself, even though it's the same injury that Brandon Graham had. But we'll see how long it takes to recover. But that's one positive thing. And I don't know how much that's going to actually affect what the Eagles plan to do in free agency or the drafts. They were already going to lose possibly Josh Sweat and Milton Williams. And if they moved on for Bryce Huff, and if Brandon Graham ended up retiring or moving on and playing
I think
somewhere
I
else,
saw Brandon Graham is
guys.
supposed to rework his deal and come back for one more season. So I don't think they're losing.
Well, he would have
Brandon
to
Graham.
sign. He would have to sign a 1-year deal because he's been signing the 1-year prove it deals. That's what he's been doing. But they gave him, I think, like $6 million, which that's going to be out of their price range, even with the jump. In
Yeah, I
salary.
think. Yeah, I
So,
saw something along the lines of Brandon Graham taking less money and coming back for one final season. But what I was trying to say about the Nolan Smith thing is somebody posted the play where DeAndre Hopkins dropped the pass and they showed Nolan Smith on that play. And that looks to be the play towards tricep one. I remember watching that play live and I did notice Nolan Smith. And to me, that looked like a hold that they missed. And when Hopkins ended up dropping that ball, I was saying, that's an example of ball don't lie because that was a missed holding call, which also is kind of funny because like Chiefs fans are like, oh, well, there are Chiefs fans who legitimately said if DeAndre Hopkins would have caught that ball, the Chiefs would have won the game, which I think is absurd because it would have changed the outlook a bit, but that was just a ridiculous statement. But yeah, and that play was only even made possible because of in my opinion, a missed hold on Nolan Smith, that play where it seems like that was the play he did tear his tricep, but
and I saw something interesting when I was looking at doing some research on Nolan Smith. His snap count. Obviously, they moved on from Hassan Reddick before this season started. That opened up the path for Nolan Smith, and a lot of people thought that he wasn't ready to take on a role like that. But his snap count in the regular season from his rookie year to last season, which was obviously the Super Bowl year of the past season that just happened, his snap count jumped from 18% to 55%. So they're going to have to add people to the rotation.
Yeah, and it jumped a lot more too once Bryce Huff got hurt because after that, Nolan Smith was
and Brandon Graham was hurt as well. I also
his
do
snap
think
count each game after that was like 90% of the snaps or
But I
so.
also do think there's like a new trend in Philadelphia to where like they utilize the defensive line rotations like they have always done in the past and always had a strong defensive line rotation. But I think some of these higher investment, younger type guys like the not Jordan Davis, but Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith kind of get the benefit of the doubt where if you're playing that well and you're that young and that productive, then we're going to let you play a little bit more than snaps than some of the other guys that they've had in the past in their rotation. So they're going to have to replace some of that production some way. The NFL Draft Combine starts this week. So Howie and Nick Sirianni were actually talking with the media today, and I caught a little bit of it. And yeah, it's kind of just like the same thing. They don't really want to show too many of their cards, so they're not going to mention too many things that they're looking to in the draft and what they're going to do. But I know they got some aces up their sleeve, and they have a lot of things that they can work with at having the resources and having a team that's pretty much filled out to where I'm asking myself, I was wondering, like, do you think they're going to go the route of more so trying to add a player that's a developmental piece that they can kind of grow into a type player, maybe like a Cam Jurgens, how he sat behind Jason Kelce, even though it was a different situation because he did get to start at guard in his second season, but even like maybe like a Keeley Ringo that's been waiting in the realms for his opportunity at cornerback, even though there was opportunities for him to grab that position before Cooper DeJean, or maybe draft like a tackle like Lane Johnson. Or do you think they're going to like somebody to sit behind Lane Johnson that he doesn't have too many years left? Or do you think they're going to go with the route of like trying to get a guy that's going to come fill in right away, like Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean were?
Well, right
season.
now they have 1 first-round pick and 2 second-round picks, right? So that's 3 picks where you expect a lot out of those players. And I think that works out perfectly because I think they need Lane Johnson's replacement, someone to sit for a year or two and then take over for Lane Johnson. I think they need Slade's replacement, somebody to sit for a year, or Slade might actually not even play this upcoming year. But you can also, if that person's not ready to play right away, you can have them sit behind Isaiah
I don't know.
Rodgers.
I'm starting to get worried about Slade going to the Lions. Honestly, I think there's like almost like a 50-50 chance he's either playing for the Eagles or the Lions next year. I think he just did the Amon-Ra St. Brown podcast too a couple of days ago, but something's telling me that
I'm not too worried about it, but I think they need to go with an offensive tackle. I think they need to go with a corner, but then I think they need to go with an edge rusher. Because
Well, I
Sweat.
think edge rusher by the day is like, as more information comes out about the Eagles, like edge rusher is likely what they're going to go target and go after. There is that one Georgia edge rusher, Michael Williams, too, that kind of has been floated around anywhere from like just outside the top 10 to like the back end of the first round. So maybe they can do that. I mean, I feel like this draft with like the positions, like the quarterbacks are like so. With what's going to happen at the top of the draft and how teams feel about Cam Ward and Shador Sanders and some of the other quarterbacks, I feel like it's not set yet, and people like aren't the highest on these quarterbacks to where it's hard to like gauge where the rest of the top position players are going to go. I mean, I saw a mock draft recently where there was like 3 running backs going in in consecutive order at the end of the first round. You know what I mean? That's something that you wouldn't see in previous years. So that could be changed with the impact that Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, and Saquon are making on the league from being either a high draft pick or a high resource spent to get them onto the roster. We were talking about possibly getting Malachi Starks, the safety from Georgia. I saw one draft with Daniel Jeremiah, who's one of the top guys for NFL.com doing that, having him at pick 32. And then I think I saw somebody from like Complex Sports or like CBS Sports have him going 5th overall. So, I feel like there's like a wide range of where all these processes.
I think right now
really change things, but
I'm looking at NFL.com's latest mock draft right now, and I've been keeping an eye on mock drafts for a bit. These mock drafts, just in general, are all over the place. Like I'm looking at NFL.com's latest mock draft. So a guy you just mentioned, Michael Williams, they have him going 7th to the Jets. And
I've seen him go. I've seen him go in the 20s for like other.
Yeah, and then also they have Ashton Genty going 20th to the Broncos. I don't think Ashton Genty falls to pick 20. And curious to see who they have the Eagles taking. They have the Eagles taking edge rusher James Pierce Jr. out
I
of
don't think he's.
Tennessee.
Yeah, I don't know if he's going to be there for that long either. But there's like a nucleus of like edge rushers that I would like, and he's one of them that I do like.
She's
And
6'5". Wow.
yeah,
Had
he is
10
a beast.
sacks his sophomore year, coming off 7.5 sacks his senior year.
I mean, they did go after what's his name too from Tennessee. The year
Yeah,
before.
I think I would love. I mean, listen, for the first round, the 32nd pick, if they take an edge rusher, a Lane Johnson replacement, or a corner, I would not be mad at either one of the three. And I don't see them taking any other position because there really isn't another position that would make sense for them to take with their first pick.
If like that kid from Ohio State, Agbuka, at wide receiver sitting there at 32 for whatever reason, like I feel like you would have to.
I don't think so. This offense does not really call for a third wide receiver to get involved too much. I think it would be a waste of a pick to bring.
I feel like tight end could be more of a likely.
Well, yeah, actually, tight end is something I would not be mad about at all.
That's another person that I've seen. Tyler Warren.
Tyler Warren. I was just about to say, if Tyler Warren somehow falls to pick 32, take Tyler Warren.
I saw him going.
Not be mad at that.
I saw him going to like the Jets at very early, and then I saw like him going in the teens as well. So he was kind of, I mean, Brock Bowers didn't get valued the way that Brock Bowers should have last draft, and he fell to 13. And the Raiders had just drafted Michael Mayer the year before in the second round, and they drafted him, and it worked out for them. So Colston Loveland, the Michigan tight end, too. I like him as well. He actually just sent a memo out to all 32 teams saying he'll be ready by training camp for a shoulder procedure that he just had done. So that's something they can look at. Grant Calcaterra, we talked about it before the podcast. I didn't know Grant Calcaterra went to Oklahoma for 3 years. It was actually a teammate with Jalen Hurts in college and then transferred to SMU for the 2021 year. But he was a 6th-round pick. So another, who's another interesting 5th-round pick from this past draft is, I don't know if the receivers are ever going to turn out to be anything, Aeneas Smith or Johnny Wilson, the 5th and 6th-round picks, but the guard that they got from Michigan last year, Trevor Keegan, I feel like he might be a sleeper like down the line for the Eagles at some point in time if they ever needed like somebody to fill in or depth-wise or had a long-term injury and they needed somebody to step up. He has like a pretty good career resume, and he was off the national championship winning Michigan roster, and he's somebody that I feel like Jeff Stoutland could maybe mold some clay with. So
yeah, I could see that.
Be somebody.
I could see that. I mean, I
like, do you feel like with Jeff Stoutland's like his ability to find these guys like Jordan Mailata, a 7th-round pick, and turn him into what he is, and then be able to also identify like, oh, well, Landon Dickerson, like without injuries, is a 1st-rounder, which most people could, and pull the trigger on that. Jason Kelsey and Jeff Stoutland identifying, and Howie Roseman, give credit to all of them, identifying that Cam Jurgens could be Jason Kelsey's replacement. Identifying Nick Sirianni was actually the guy that identified that Mekhi Becton might be able to play guard, and he was the one that suggested it. And I remember last year during the podcast when we just brought up that, yeah, the Eagles signed Mekhi Becton to a $5 million contract, and it was just kind of like breezed over, and like there was potential there. And then they obviously got Lane with the first pick. But do you feel like the Eagles, knowing Jeff Stoutland's ability, like, is it worth even drafting guys in the 1st round right anymore? Like, unless you're like in love with them as offensive linemen.
Yeah, I would say yeah, because I mean, it's not like they've gotten all their great offensive linemen from, obscure places like the 7th round and from, the New York Jets. I mean, Cam Jurgens, he was a 2nd-round pick. Landon Dickerson, he was a 2nd-round pick. These are guys that Tyler Steen, a 2nd-round pick. These
Tyler
are guys.
Steen was a 3rd-round pick. Everyone always says he's a 2nd-round pick. He was a 3rd.
Tyler Steen was 3rd? I thought he was 2nd.
So in that draft, what everybody forgets about is the draft pick. I think it was the Dolphins got their draft pick taken away from them in the 1st round for tampering. So there was only 31 picks in the 1st round of the draft. So he was the 65th overall pick, the 2nd pick in the 3rd round. But he would have been the 3rd pick if there was actually the amount of picks in the round.
Well, either way, Either way, it was a relatively.
And real quickly, they traded that with the Texans for that Juice Scruggs, the interior lineman that went to Penn State, and he's just like irrelevant. And Tyler Steen obviously possibly has a career ahead of him. And
so look,
the next pick, that's when they had back-to-back picks. So they had the 65th overall pick, and then the 66th overall pick was Sidney Brown. So that was another good depth piece for that they don't ever utilize Sidney Brown.
I think Sidney Brown deserves more playing time. For some reason, they prioritized McCollum over him, which I still think is nonsense. I don't even like. I can't watch
another game where McCollum and in the Super Bowl when Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, he gave up that touchdown.
That was also on Sidney Brown's head too, though. It was on Sidney Brown's head too.
Well, anyway, look, the point I'm getting to here is they've taken their fair share of linemen high up in the draft, as well as they've gotten a fair share of their linemen from obscure places. I mean, and then even outside of, you look at the obscure linemen, you have your Jason Kelsey's, your Jordan Mailata's, your Mekhi Becton's, guys who have came from either late in the draft or, just weren't doing anything with their careers. But then you also look at Lane Johnson, who was taken high up in the first round. You look at Cam Jurgens, who was a second round pick, Landon Dickerson, who was a second round pick. You can't just rely on getting all your offensive linemen from later in the draft or free agency and trust that Jeff Stoutland is going to turn them into a star. You still also have to take high talent. But as of right now, I mean, this offense, other than Lane Johnson, this offensive line is set for years. Mailata, Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, Tyler Steen, or Becton, they're all very young guys. You just need to replace Lane Johnson, then you're setting pretty for quite some time.
That's also another reason why I don't really want to give up any of the draft picks. And also at the Combine today down in Indianapolis, former vice president of football operations for the Eagles in 2019, Andrew Berry, who's now the Browns GM, worked with the Browns previously, went to the Eagles for a year, then went back to the Browns. He said that he has no plans on trading Myles Garrett. So that seems like the Browns are gonna dig in and try and keep him on the roster and maybe sell him with what they do and plan to do in the draft.
But sometimes you hear about that and it turns out being incorrect.
Well, I feel like Washington
speaking of incorrect reports, I don't know how much you go on Twitter, but the past couple of days were pretty funny because there was a report that came out that the Eagles wouldn't be visiting the White House, and a bunch of people got upset. And then there was a report that they would be visiting the White House, and then the other people got upset. So I mean, you can't really trust these reports you see unless it comes from somebody like Adam Schefter. You just can't trust.
Well, that Andrew Berry comment literally came from Andrew Berry.
Okay, but either way, even with that, sometimes they say, they're not getting rid of somebody, and then they end up getting rid of them. That happens all across sports, but
yeah. Of course, that's obviously a part of the game, but I mean, I feel like they're going to do everything. I feel like Washington kind of opened up a pathway to I know we're picking at the top of the draft and we suck right now. We're lack of talent on the roster, but I mean, Cleveland has a good baseline of a defense. Better than what Washington had when they drafted Jaden Daniels, and then look at how far Washington was able to make it. But then you get into trying to pitch that, and then you also have to mention the part with look at the AFC and look at what you're going against in the AFC quarterback-wise to get over the hump to actually make it to that point. So that was just interesting. Also, one of the top free agents, no one really talks about it. You know how all that Vic Fangio Miami beef was going on? How all the Miami players kind of spoke out about Vic Fangio. One of the most outspoken people of the players that weren't with the Vic Fangio coaching style was actually safety from Oregon, Javon Holland, who's a young and up-and-coming safety. He's actually a pretty good player. He's 25 years old. He's one of the hottest commodities on the market this year. And he's out there. So I feel like it's funny that he's out in free agency and Miami didn't even want to bring him back after they spent a second round pick, I think, on him. And he's been a pretty good player for them and pretty productive. But it just shows even with how talented you are and everything, if you're not willing to be coached hard, then, not too many teams are going to be interested in you. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Also, the Bills paid 5th round 2022 selection, Khalil Shakir. I keep saying Shakur like Tupac, but Shakir, 5th rounder, like I said, from 2022, wide receiver, decent player. Had like 800 yards receiving this year, a little bit over it. Never had a 1,000-yard receiving season. He's getting 32 million guaranteed, 4 years, 60 million, making almost more in guaranteed money than the entirety of the Saquon Barkley contract. So, do you think at any point in time the Eagles are going to look down the line and just pay Saquon like a little bit more, give him a raise just because? Like, do you think that's going to happen?
No. I mean,
I know he has incentives been built into his contract, so there's a bunch of different incentives that he can always hit on.
But like giving guys on the roster extra money is never something that like Howie Roseman.
But that's also interesting. That actually just triggered my brain because I forgot about it. I saw like something online. I didn't look too far into it, but James Cook, Dalvin Cook's brother, who just had a bunch of rushing touchdowns this season, solid player. James Cook ended up apparently unfollowing the Bills on Instagram because he wanted a $15 million per year contract. And apparently they're not willing to offer him that, but they just gave it to a guy that's never had a 1,000-yard receiving season. And they gave that money to him. So I maybe it's just from the Bills perspective, but the value of running backs, as much as we think it's getting progressed forward, or maybe James Cook's just asking for a little bit too much with not the most proven resume, but that could be causing some issues there. So hopefully running backs get paid, but if the value stays at it, I mean, the Eagles got the bargain of the absolute century with being able to get Saquon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very curious to see how he works his magic this offseason as he does every offseason. It's going to be very interesting to play out. Interesting to see
Packers. Do you think the Eagles can
with the Bryce Huff contract and the James Bradbury contract? So yeah, I'm excited to see how things shake up. Free agency starts in less than a week, by the way. No, not less than a week. It starts, I think legal tampering starts March 10th, and then free agency starts on the 12th.
Yeah, March 12th is when it officially opens. So it's usually like 3 days before the actual contract when you can sign the contract period opens, but we start hearing some news around that time. So there's a couple more things before we get out of here. The Packers, there's an unknown team that requested for the tush push to be banned, and we found out that it was the Packers. And then after that news came out, the Falcons head coach Raheem Morris, who the Eagles played obviously the Packers twice this year and the Falcons once, the Falcons head coach came out and said that play should have been banned 3 years ago. It seems like there might be teams trying to pile on. Do you think like the whole league is going to get behind it just to ban it? Because no one's doing the tush push besides the Eagles, and the teams that are doing the tush push are using their like tight end. The Ravens.
Yeah, listen, we have 3 seasons worth of evidence now that the tush push. We have 3 seasons worth of evidence of advocating for the tush push to not be banned. 3 seasons worth of the Eagles specifically doing extremely well, other teams not being able to do it as well. Look at the Bills' lack of success with it. The Packers themselves, they tried using it at one point and they failed. So I mean, after 3 seasons worth of other teams trying to do it and not doing it nearly as successfully as the Eagles, that is enough evidence, in my opinion, that the play is not overpowered. It's just how well the Eagles do it. And there haven't been any injuries as a result of it. The only injury was Chris Jones straining his neck a bit from it, but that's because he lined up sideways to try and stop it. That was purely on him.
I thought the unknown team was going to be the Chiefs just based off of that play solo.
Yeah. I don't think there's any chance of the tush push getting banned.
Speaking of the Chiefs, some Chiefs news today. Travis Kelce is set to return. So the Chiefs actually gave Travis Kelce a deadline. That's
news. I didn't even know he might not have returned.
They gave him a deadline to come back, and he looked at.
I didn't even know that. But when were people talking about this being Travis Kelce's final year? All of a sudden, this could have been his final
Travis
year.
Kelce.
Whoa, Travis Kelce's back. It's like, okay.
Well, that wasn't the only Travis Kelce. apparently they gave him a deadline and they asked him to come back as a role player specifically. So that
but like that came out along with the news that he's returning. So it's not really news then, is it? It's like maybe
like also a lot of people
throughout the season. It's like, well, Travis Kelce has a deadline. Oh, we're getting close to the deadline. Will he be a role player next year? If this was like a talk throughout the season or since the Super Bowl, that'd be like, oh, this is news. He's returning. But you can't just say he's returning. And guess what? He had a deadline to let them know if he was returning and they wanted to be a role player. That's like, it's not really news then because it doesn't come at you as a surprise.
All right, well, you want to hear some news about a tight end in the NFL? Apparently, there's rumors that Gronk is looking to come out of retirement and possibly play for his former colleague, if I'm saying that correctly, colleague. I want to say co-employee, but that didn't even make sense. Colleague at NFL Fox NFL. Coworker, yeah. I just had a brain fart and completely forgot about the word coworker. So there's rumors that Gronk might be targeting a step out of retirement to go play for the Broncos of all teams. He likes Bo Nix.
He hasn't played since 2021. He's 35 years old. I don't think he's coming.
If one person can come out of the woodworks, if one person that could come out of the woodworks out of nowhere and do it, I feel like it would be Gronk, though.
But it won't be. It won't.
They used to tell stories about him, like he would go out drinking and he would get dropped off at the Patriots facility, fall asleep on the rehab training table, and they would hook up IVs into him while he's passed out drunk, and he would just wake up like Frankenstein, a zombie, and just go lift weights. I think Julian Edelman told that story.
Yeah, but that was Gronk in his 20s. The man is in his mid 30s now. He
didn't look bad on the Bucks, but yeah, I mean, Father.
Yeah, but that was also in 2021. So
I feel like you would have to make it worth it.
A lot of time has passed since then.
I feel like you'd have to do something more interesting than coming out of retirement to go play for the Broncos if that was like your actual intentions. But
yeah.
But somebody else that did retire, former Eagles great, even though it got watered down a little bit when he joined the Cowboys, even though he wasn't even in a prominent role with the Cowboys, which makes it even worse because the opportunity wasn't as big. So there was not really that big of a point to join them, but he wanted to rack up some years on his resume. Jason Peters, after 19 seasons, the Eagles infamously made a trade to acquire Jason Peters, who was an undrafted tight end coming into the NFL. And he was the anchor point for an offensive line from I think it was 2010 to how long was his Eagles?
He was with the Eagles from 2008 up until I want to say 2020. But I know we got him in 2008. I think 2019 or 2020 was his final season.
His first season was 27 years old, 2009 with the Eagles, and he played until 2020 with the Eagles. Obviously, he was.
I was actually off on his first season with the Eagles. Yeah,
so
he was with the Bills 04 to 08. That's I was getting confused, but yeah, and then played for Chicago in 21, Dallas in 2022 at the age of 40. Only appeared in one game.
That one hurt. Honestly,
I disagree there. This was a guy who just wanted to keep playing football. Obviously he didn't have many options out there. So he went to the Cowboys. He only played in one actual game for them. I do not give a shit about that 2022 season with the Cowboys. And then he played his final year for the Seahawks in 2023. He didn't play it all this past year. And now has finally retired. So we can finally retire his number, put him in the Hall of Fame, all that. I've been waiting quite a few years for this. It's about damn time.
Yeah, it was about
damn time. Man is 43 years old.
It's pretty ridiculous, like how long that he lasted. I was looking at even like some of the draft classes from back in the day, and just a classic one, just because it's combine time, I felt like to mention this. Just the 2002 Eagles draft was a classic draft for the Eagles. Lito Shepherd at pick 26, Michael Lewis, safety, at pick 58 in the second round, Sheldon Brown the next pick at 59. So they went 3 DBs in a row. And those were the 3 guys next to Brian Dawkins for how many years as like one of the best nucleuses of defensive backs the Eagles have ever had. And then the 4th pick, but in the 3rd round, was Brian Westbrook. So that was an iconic Eagles draft. I was trying to see and date back to like because that stretch of time from like 2020 when the Eagles drafted, what was it? They drafted Jalen Reagor, Jalen Hurts, and who did they get in the third round that year?
Wait, what year?
2020.
The Jalen Hurts draft, third round. I don't even know. I got nothing on that. Did they even have a third round pick?
I'm pretty sure they did. I'm just drawing a blank on it for some reason. Oh, it was classic Eagle, Davion Taylor.
I had high hopes for Taylor, actually. I had high
That
hopes for him.
draft class,
He had so much speed at the linebacker
that draft
position.
class was so bad outside of Jalen
And then
Hurts.
they had Kevon Wallace, who I also had high hopes for.
Yeah, I thought he was
gonna be really
Clemson
good.
safety. I thought he was going to be good.
Is Jack Driscoll still an Eagle? No, he's not.
Remember John Hightower?
Jack Driscoll. I don't know why when you pull up his Pro Football Reference page, it shows him in a Dolphins jersey. But yeah, no, he was with the team. He actually started a game this past year.
That's when we had no wide receivers. Like John Hightower.
So Jack Driscoll ended up being a good draft because he's just been a solid depth piece for us this whole time. John Hightower, that was another bad pick.
Just
Sean Bradley was okay. Quez Watkins, he was good for like a little bit and then ended up helping cost us a Super Bowl. Prince Tego Wanago, he did nothing. And then Casey Toohill, I forgot all about that name as well.
Yeah, I brought that up because I was looking back, because from 2021 on, their first 3-round picks have all just been studs that have just been starters for them. So I was trying to figure out the trend of when they did that. And if you look at those drafts from 2012 to 2004, the Eagles had some horrible drafts of literally coming out with almost nothing, netting nothing out of 1 or 2 players. And it's just crazy the run that they're on right now and how well that Howie is drafting. There's certain teams that I kind of feel concerned about, in the draft, Will Johnson. I've seen go anywhere from top 5 to falling to the San Francisco 49ers at pick 11. On top of that, I also saw that the team with the second best odds to sign Zach Bond is San Francisco, the 49ers. So imagine if
I don't even want to talk about the idea of Bond going anywhere besides the Eagles. I don't even want to bring up that topic.
I just wanted to bring it up because I saw stuff like that, and I was thinking last year I felt like the Cowboys were down. The 49ers obviously didn't live up to the hype that they were supposed to live up to coming off the Super Bowl year and everything. Which teams? The Bengals were another team that didn't end up making the playoffs, but were right there, but obviously have one of the best quarterbacks in the league. If you're going to do a way too early foreshadowing of this upcoming season, which team of that type of realm do you think returns to their form or gets close to
the Bengals? The Bengals. I mean, they had just gotten off to a slower start than they're used to. I mean, they've always gotten off to slow starts and then turn things back around. They did turn things back around, but it was too low, too late. I like the Bengals' chances to return to the playoffs again next season.
And Joe Burrow did make those comments about how it seems to work for the Eagles, by paying everybody. That's the formula they're doing. So they're franchise tagging T. Higgins.
Yeah, but I mean, that comment by Joey, I mean, the Eagles have also drafted tremendously well the past few years. That's also part of it. Not just by paying everybody. I think that's such
I'm pretty sure their defense.
I love Joe Burrow, but I think that's kind of an ignorant statement.
Yeah, their defense is absolutely horrible. They just hired a new defensive coordinator. Their defense is so bad. Their best defensive player, Trey Hendrickson, was asking for a trade, I think, last year and could still be in that situation. I think their best linebacker, Jermaine Pratt, asked for a trade. And then I also saw when I was looking back on the draft, the Bengals drafted Miles Murphy from Clemson before Nolan Smith, and that was an absolute whiff. I mean, if you go to the combine and you see Nolan Smith run a 4.39 at 6'2", 240, and then he jumps a 41-inch vertical leap, and you don't think he's a top 20 pick, I think you're just absolutely crazy. I just think you're crazy.
Yeah. Anyway, though, I got it. It's 5:00 in 3 minutes, so I gotta head out of here. I think that wraps up all our topics for today.
Yeah, that wraps it up. I had one more topic. Just AJ Brown just made some comments on some podcasts talking about at times
We can always just save that for next week. I mean, it's not like we're gonna have other Eagles topics progress over the next week. We can save that for next week.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just he just said that him and AJ butt heads at times, but that's just like normal for two alphas. So,
and this is just, and even though this is a new comment, this is just the same thing over and over again, where it's like, oh, is there turmoil between AJ and Jalen Hurts? Like, I'm so sick of that. So, yeah, that's probably nothing, as it always is.
Yeah, it is not. So I appreciate you guys tuning in to episode 87 of the Paisan Sports podcast. Trying to think what I can preview for next week. I mean, maybe we'll probably my prediction would be the Sixers shut down Joel Embiid for the rest of the season. That puts the actually a little that will spark some excitement because people will actually see a path to possibly the number 1 overall pick in the NBA draft this season to draft Cooper Flagg or maybe even Ace Bailey if he ends up jumping the ship for the number 1 overall pick. Phillies, maybe we have like a more of a consistent lineup that we see through these spring training games, and we can kind of predict what they're going to do. And Eagles, I mean, we could have some news at who they're targeting combine wise and who they're talking to at the combine, and maybe some free agency news about who they're targeting to maybe bring onto the roster or retain. So we'll have that for you guys next week. But thank you guys for tuning in. Presented by Elevation 5280 Sports.